So our next speaker is Ron Petersen, and I don't think I have to say anything more than that, do I?
Well, I have more to say than that. I've got about 12 minutes to talk at you. And this comes about because Tom Bruns, some months ago, asked me whether I'd be willing to give one of the keynote addresses. And I said, sure, why not? Then a month later, he came back and told me I had 15 minutes. Then he came back with, I think it was 47 questions that I'm supposed to address. So here's my talk, and it has nothing to do with anything, but you'll see what it's about. Now, we did this ATBI. It took us some years, and what we did was we added to some of the fungi that we knew in the park already. We added some that we had not known in the park before, and we've added a couple that were new to science. That's an old story. That's what ATBIs do. But the idea that Tom eventually got to me from was lessons learned. So I've got 7 or 8 lessons, and here they go. Start with a checklist. We were so lucky we had Hessler's checklist, which was updated some 25 years ago in nomenclature, and it was published. It was part of the park archive. So we had something to compare that which we picked up and keyed out to, had he ever seen it before, at least with his credibility and his voucher specimens and the collection that we had made and its voucher, obviously. So we had a way. Start out with a checklist. It's a lesson learned. It should be mycologist generated or compiled from herbarium records. Well, Barbara told us about that this morning. And voucher collections ought to be cited. It's not just Lactarius piperatus, which, by the way, I'm not sure that we have in the United States, but we ought to have Lactarius piperatus and a TENN number after it so that we know the specimen that we got it from. Lesson number 2, establish a database. Well, we started this back in the 70s with a database called Notebook. And we got about 1,000 collections into that database when it crashed. And we had to start all over again. Not exactly with Knutson's typewriter, but very close. And then we had a collection manager, Victor Ma, who actually wrote the database, an access-based database. Right now we have in excess of 64,000 records. We have photographs in a separate database, which will be linked to that. We have all of our field books now scanned so that will be linked to each specimen. So we're coming along, and with the database is being established. Use models, start from scratch, and inter-database communication. I was worried in the 1970s, was Notebook going to talk to the New York Botanical Garden or the Smithsonian or the University of Florida? And the answer was no, it was not going to. Now it's possible that they can communicate back and forth. So any platform you choose, but choose a platform and get on with it. Lesson number 3, choose your experts carefully. If you're going to have somebody come in and collect in your territory for your ATBI, and they're going to look over the specimens that they collect, and they're going to report authoritatively on what it was that they found, those are all filters, and they're all indeed serious filters. And we invited a number of people, some of which showed up and didn't tell us what they collected. Some didn't show up in the first place. So choose your experts carefully. Promissory notes are only promises. Just because I say, yeah, I'll be there in August of 2014, doesn't say that when August 2014 rolls around that I'm going to be anywhere in North America. You see it. Lesson number 4, define the scope and the depth. One of the neat things about the Great Smoky Mountains National Park is that they have literally scores of overlaying maps that they can produce. You want to see everywhere where the subsoil is shale? They've got a map that shows you all the shale. You want a map that shows you the extent of spruce fir islands? They've got a map. But what they'd like from us is a whole bunch of herbarium records that tell them whether Megacalybia rodmanii, where does it occur? Under 2,000 feet, over 2,000 feet, underneath nothing but, I don't know what, hemlock? They have the overlays. But in order to tell them that, we really ought to have about 300 specimens of Megacalybia rodmanii from all over the park, so that they can look at the GPS readings and overlay their map, and they can say, you see that? It never goes above 1,500 feet. Or, you never found it outside Cataloochee Cove, or whatever that cross-hatching is. That's called hay baling. By the time you've collected the 149th specimen of Megacalybia rodmanii, you're not going to want to collect the 150th. That's just hay baling. So there is this kind of dissension in the data. How many specimens do you need to make a meaningful metadata? And the answer is probably, for a herbarium like ours, too many. So we just simply don't collect that many. Parallel studies, you've already heard Andy Miller, other people in there looking at lichens and so forth. There are lots of other studies, and they need to be taken into account, especially when you're looking at a place like the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. An inventory is not a series of monographs. An inventory is simply names on a list, hopefully vouchered with some kind of a herbarium specimen, and ideally vouchered by a sequence. That sequence doesn't have to be the archetype sequence or the barcode sequence. That barcode sequence ought to be chosen very carefully, both geographically and taxonomically. It can be an annotated checklist. By this time, Hessler's list is well annotated, as you can imagine. And it may depend on a series of monographs. After all, there is a monograph of Lactarius in North America that has to serve as a basis for the first step in looking at the Lactariuses in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. So monographs play a foundation role. They don't necessarily get produced by an inventory. The value of a name. Who is it that gave you that name? And how did you come by it? Who furnished the name? When was the name added to the list? Yesterday afternoon at 4 o'clock or 1935? There's a difference. Is the name vouchered and where all sequences should be available? Lesson number 7. Taxonomic synonyms have no place in an inventory. That is to say, if it's the same basionym recombined into 17 different genera, that may have a place in a database or an inventory. But if there's a different species epithet based on a different type, it has no place in an inventory. It may have a place in a monograph. It just doesn't get included in an inventory, and certainly not in a database. Ask me my opinion of Index fungorum, the current name, and its synonyms. No place in the database. That's the job of the monographer. They are conclusions. They are not data. So the conclusion of all of this, inventories are not casual sightings. We have fern walks in the park, and they log, I saw Asplenium montanum. We've heard this morning already. Disregard what I'm saying. Inventories are not casual sightings. Inventories should be vouchered with all available data, all of those data. Inventory should be defined in scope and in real estate. If you're going to cover the xylariales, say so. If you don't think that those are macrofungi because a whole bunch of them don't have dead man's fingers, then say so. We're not going to deal with that group. We're going to deal with this group over here. So, and the real estate, obviously, our ATBI was with the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It has boundaries. And so that was our territory. The fact that Hessler, and since him, me, and since me, numerous of my students because we've camped out over there in Macon County, North Carolina, in the mountains over there near Highlands. That is not part of the ATBI for the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. If we were doing the Southern Appalachians, good stuff. Now I have one more lesson that I would not put on a public slide. And the lesson is this way: if you have an opportunity, get romantically entangled with your research partner. She didn't know it was coming either. And if, you know, certainly just the research effort is worth it. On the other hand, over a late evening cigarette, you know, after the action is done, what the hell are you going to talk about? You know, you can talk about the ATBI and the Great Smoky Mountains. It just brings it all together. Well, that's my story. I know what kind of question you're going to ask me.
First time I ever saw you give a talk, you had beautiful fungi, but no name. And you went on and on, slide after slide.
I did?
Yeah, it was New Zealand or someplace.
Probably.
The next time, you had lots of fungus names, but no slides. Now you've come around to having slides.
Just a minute. Let me get my other thumb drive. And I'll show you 78 unassorted pictures.
So, how much help did you have with this? Like, okay, some of these records went way back, and so you pulled up the records and so on. But how many people on the ground were surveying the Great Smokies with you? And obviously that was it's a sliding scale.
No, your hands are too far apart. This is not a fish story.
Sliding scale of activity on how much input each of these people might have had. But were there a lot of bodies on the ground?
Well, one has to go back to how many of those bodies you haven't sketched out alive or dead. So I have to go back and I have to say, but Hessler and Hessler's sidekick Jack Sharp and their sidekick Art Stupka, who was the naturalist in the park, 1930s. Hessler got there in 1919 as a plant pathologist, and he started collecting mushrooms when he decided that he knew enough about plant pathology. Enough of that was done. What needs to be done? And he was picking up mushrooms, and he decided about 1921, 22, I think I'll start fooling with the mushrooms. So how many people? Well, their students, their friends and colleagues and so forth, and then it comes up after he retired, I got there, blah, blah, blah. And our students, probably 15 or 20 of them.
So this is decades of
Absolutely.
assembled records.
Absolutely. I'll repeat, he got to Tennessee in 1919.
Right. That seems to me like an unusual opportunity in North America that there's a handful of such places where there might be that kind of records over that span of time. I can think of like University of Michigan around there. There's certainly be some.
Yeah.
Trying to think of where else. Maybe San Francisco State. Obviously, there's places that they've collected over years. But,
Right.
But for most of the country, we probably have a really different situation.
Well, one of the things that Barb is going to find out, she already knows it because of her family, but she would find out that part of that gap in the middle of the United States includes most of Texas. But if you start databasing the country's herbaria, you're going to find out that Harry Tears lived in Texas, and a whole bunch of specimens are where? San Francisco.
Right.
But there they are, out there. So some of that gap may get changed in some way because of history, not necessarily because of David Lewis, because he lives there and collects there now. Okay, I've had it.